When I was 16, I met a boy who I thought was my soulmate. I had never really been interested in dating then and could care less what everyone else my age was doing, but when I saw him, something changed.
He was incredibly funny, not a shy guy, but not outgoing either.
We shared the same friend group and spent all of our time together. We were inseparable.
When I finally found someone that actually liked me the way I always wanted, someone that was interested in who I was and what I had to say, it quickly became consuming. Fast forward to about 4 months into our relationship, and I left my friends and aspirations behind when I decided to transfer colleges to be closer to home and to him.
He showered me with romantic gifts. On my birthday, I awoke to 24 long-stem roses, a house full of 300 balloons, and a violin. I thought, wow, I found the whole package. Love at first sight, a happily ever after, I found everything.
We got married after only 6 months of knowing each other. I thought he was my soulmate, but during that time, he was on his best behavior.
The fact that I made a pretty big decision like this for a guy I hardly knew should have been yet another red flag. But I ignored it.
And then when I gave up some of my independence to move in with him, I was ignored. He stopped caring.
But this first part is setting the scene. It's the reason why it took me years to identify what happened to me as rape.
A lot of people think abuse is a pattern, something that repeats over and over again in the same way, but I don't necessarily believe that's true. Even one instance can have a profound impact on the relationship and the people in it. Abuse is when you openly disregard someone else's right to set their own boundaries.
I don't know if people understand that it doesn't have to get physical to be abuse.
I mean, physical is awful, but when you're being mentally abused, no one knows. Like, nobody can see it. They can't see the proof.
For me, abuse, whether it be romantic or sexual or both, is an abuse of power against you and someone chipping away at your own power, whether that be with their words or with their physical actions, making you feel like you don't have autonomy in your body and in your decisions.
Anytime that your personal boundaries are being crossed and the other person knows, whether it be physically, emotionally, or mentally, that's abuse.
If you're in a relationship and you have that feeling like you don't want to go home, that person scares you, that you don't know how they're going to react to things or how they're going to make you feel, I mean, that's abuse.
People don't want to be lonely, so they'll do anything to keep it even if it's not good. The thought of not being with that person, it like makes you sick. You don't imagine anything else but being with that person. I never talk about it, even to the people who were there that night. They can't back up what I say. They can't remember that boy taking me into the bathroom, pulling the toilet seat down, and having me blow him. No one else was around except him and I in that bathroom with the bright white light, fully being able to see and experience the dick in my mouth. The clarity in his voice, "I'm gonna come." He locked us in the bathroom door for me to blow him while I was in absolutely no condition to agree to anything.
One night he randomly started going off about how he hated some band that I had a poster of on my wall. The poster was from a friend. I didn't really care for them, but I hung it up because it was a gift. He ripped the poster into pieces. I started to cry when he acted like everything was okay. The next red flag I remembered was when the two of us were hanging out with my best friend. For some reason, he decided to bring up his ex-girlfriend. He explained how she drew on her eyebrows and that because he couldn't bear to look at her, he had to have sex with her from behind. I remember thinking even then how inappropriate and how awful that story was. How could someone treat a girl like that just for sex?
I told our two friends that he was drinking too much and having a really difficult time. They agreed and expressed sympathy, but didn't really do anything to help. I felt like I was the only one able to take care of him. I told him how uncomfortable the drinking made me and how scared I was that something would happen again. He said he understood, but he got drunk, passed out, and woke up in a violent fit. He broke things and threw things. I packed my stuff and left,
drove to my parents' home, and let myself in to spend the night. All night, he sent horrible, abusive, ridiculous texts. He said he hoped I got hit by a train, thought my pussy was gross, he was going to move away with his friend and never see me again, and good riddance.
One night, he and his mom had a horrible fight. It was so bad that it got physical, and he spit in her face and beat her to the ground. I was horrified, but had thought, it's okay. He would never do that to me. He loves me. I ignored it all, clouded by my love for him. I couldn't picture my life without him, even if those things he said made me upset.
I felt like I was a kid in trouble, just confused about why I was being scolded and hurt. It was similar to my childhood. I was embarrassed and ashamed that I had caused such drama in our relationship, and I begged him not to leave me.
When he first pulled a knife on me, I was pregnant with our child. That was the first incident when I noticed a change in who I thought he was.
When I didn't want to have sex, he was angry, so we had sex anyway. When I didn't want to do anal, he was irritated and felt that I wasn't trying for him. When I sucked it up and did anal anyway, it was painful, and he would grow irritated when I told him to stop. Our relationship was 5.5 years of mental games. I didn't want to anger any male figure in my life, so in my relationship, I often gave in and did as I was told.
Because I was pregnant, I stayed in the relationship and we went to counseling. After the baby came, the counseling seemed to work, so we went on as normal.
He started drinking more and more heavily. He punched a hole in the drywall and then another. He would pass out drunk on the couch, then wake up screaming incoherently. He would go into the bathroom and refuse to come out for hours at a time. I would have to pee in the kitchen sink. He wouldn't engage me in conversation when I tried to help. He refused to talk to me about what was troubling him. I could see he was struggling with depression, and I felt for him.
After our second child, he started breaking everything in the house. He was provoked by almost everything, and I was terrified of even asking something that might make him upset. I started to not be allowed out with friends unless he was going, and then soon enough I wasn't allowed to be around them at all. I eventually started sneaking out and pretending I had to work when I didn't, just so I can get some time away from him. At the same time, I couldn't picture my life without him.
I remember once begging him to spend more time with me and accused him of holding my love hostage, and that set him off. He put a bandana over his face and locked me in the bathroom, and he guarded the door and said he wanted me to know what it really felt like to be a hostage. I think I was in there for 2 days.
I had gone to the police when he threatened me with a knife. That threat was physical, obvious, but he was smart and manipulative. I think he knew not to do anything that bad again, as it could be a definite way of driving me away. After that, he continued only with the emotional and verbal abuse. I would go on vacation to Florida with my kids to visit my elderly parents. Right when we were about to leave, he would threaten that he was going to call the authorities and have me picked up for kidnapping his child. Oftentimes, I'd get into the car to go somewhere and hear him make this evil laugh and say, "I hope your brakes don't fail."
It was a nightmare, but I still had this hope inside that I knew how much we loved each other, and that was the most important thing to me.
I drank late into the night, and knowing that I was scheduled for work the following day, I insisted, "I think it's time for me to turn in." But he wouldn't let me. He begged, "This is the last time we'll all be together." So, filled with guilt, I drank more. Before long, I found myself stumbling into a bedroom to sleep for the night. He forced himself into the room, turned off the light, and pushed me onto the bed. So the pleading began. "No, I don't want to do this. No, we can't do this. Stop. Please stop. No, I have a boyfriend."
3 years passed without any issue of him being aggressive towards me, but he suddenly changed. He got very angry and would start screaming during our fights. The first time he broke my favorite lamp in his outburst, and the next time he cut himself, wanting to make me feel like I was going to be the reason for his suicide.
He started talking about suicide all the time. He ranted about how much he hated people, family, friends, celebrities, and I listened, always on edge, afraid to contradict him. Any neutral or hopeful statements I offered were shot down. That's when he started to say cruel things to me. He told me I was stupid and naive and that I really didn't share his beliefs and I was just pretending. He told me I ruined his life and made everything worse. And part of me believed him.
His aggression had gotten to the point that his mother's whole house was destroyed. Every door had been broken off the hinges and into several pieces. The walls had holes from where he had wanted to punch me but held back.
Then he got violent with objects. I gathered my things and told him I was going to leave for a while. He lost it and said he'd kill me if I left. I knew deep down that I didn't believe him, but I was still so terrified. Our struggle became physical. He bit my neck, he bit my thigh. I ended up spending the night on the floor shivering, even though I wasn't cold.
In another instance, I found him in the bedroom with the television blasting. When I asked him to please turn the volume down so I go to sleep, he lost it, and I was whipped with my bike chain. His friend came in the middle of it, got him to stop, and then yelled at me for getting him upset.
The worst fight of all happened on yet another night when he wanted sex and I didn't. He held my face down in the pillow. I was crying and screaming for help as he tried to force himself on me. His mom was yelling for me to shut up from the other room, and luckily it distracted him enough for me to get up and run across the room to the door. He blocked me, so I grabbed a belt that was lying on the floor and swung it as hard as I could, but it didn't faze him. He threw me across the room into the wall. I broke a table with my fall and hurt my back very badly.
Our friends texted us about meeting for breakfast, so I went to meet them with a very visible bite mark bruise on my neck. I texted him to say where I was and specifically mentioned I wasn't going to tell them what happened. He texted back that they wouldn't believe me anyway. We ate breakfast. Neither of them noticed the bruise, or if they did, they didn't comment.
It's hard to talk about now because as I look back on it, I am ashamed and embarrassed at how long I let it go on for. I could never quite find the strength to end it. I couldn't end it the day he convinced me that I needed to try anal sex because my refusal meant I didn't love him. And through my angry tears, I screamed at him when he wouldn't stop calling me on my drive home, frantically threatening suicide if I didn't come back to him right then.
No, 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 no. For minutes this went on. And then I stopped saying no because no matter how many times I said it, my words weren't being heard. Eventually, I stopped pushing him off and stopped talking.
Another thing about realizing red flags later in life is that you recall making excuses for them. No one wanted to be labeled a victim in the negative sense.
I think people are pretty good at seeing red flags, but not speaking up about them. So if there's something that doesn't feel right, it doesn't seem right, more than likely it's not right.
It was difficult for me to peg it as rape, and the shame that came with that in terms of, well, I could have done this, I could have done that, I should have said no more, but everything I did wasn't being heard, so none of that would have mattered. And I know that now, but convincing yourself of that when you're 17 is a whole different story.
We judge ourselves enough, and a lot of that comes from others. I've been judged like, oh, well, you're the one that stayed, and you knew this was going on, so the continued guilt and embarrassment, blame, all of those feelings, it's just easier to continue without talking about it.
They don't realize your situation. Everybody has a different reason why they're stuck, but people just think, well, why don't you leave? You can just leave, and that's not true. Being a woman and having kids, for me personally, you have to figure out how you're going to support your children first. It's not just you. I went to a shelter once before, and it's only temporary, and if you really don't have like a way to support yourself when you get out of the shelter, because you can only be there for a certain amount of time, that's it. You're right back to where you started. These are all the things that like terrify you, and being alone is scary. You know, you can't imagine being with anybody else. You've been with somebody for so long and you've gotten used to the way they treat you, and you know, you're always scared it's going to happen again.
Women don't want to come forward because they're afraid. If you feel like you're with an abusive person, you're afraid to go get help or talk to somebody because they can come and retaliate against you.
I woke up the next day and was proud to go to church. I wanted to be absolved of my wrongdoings. I wanted to forget what happened. I never mentioned the bathroom or that boy. I went back to school as a junior after that summer. When I saw that boy in the hallway, I became physically ill. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. I don't think he knew my name or what I looked like.
You would think, how could she return to such an environment? But I did. It was true love. We were soulmates. My partner was sick and I couldn't leave him alone. I compared it to someone having a disease or cancer, and it would have been unacceptable to leave. He also told me on several occasions that I couldn't leave. I knew too much. So it went on for several more years. My parents and grandparents were together with their spouses for so long, and they're still married, so I felt like a failure for ending my first relationship. I think this is a big reason why the second relationship went on for so long.
At this time, my mother was also struggling at home with her own abusive boyfriend, and I felt like I had nowhere to go. In between the fights, he would apologize, buy me gifts, and try to show how he felt. And he would cry about how much he loved me and tell me often he would die without me.
I tried a lot to leave him, but his apologies after an episode always meant something to me until they didn't. But that's when he would threaten suicide if I left him. And he'd threaten it immediately if I went to anyone for help.
I started talking to my friends about what was going on and why I wasn't going out anymore. I told them that I was scared, that he would delete their numbers from my phone, that I wasn't allowed to talk to my mom, and that I was being forced to do things in bed. I didn't think anything of it until my friend told me how wrong that really was, and that I was being raped. The thought didn't even cross my mind until she said it.
No matter what I did, it felt like something I didn't do or couldn't do right. Trying to constantly please didn't stop the behavior. In the end, it didn't fix anything. During our entire relationship, I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells. I stopped confronting him when anything happened. I could not express my opinion or how I felt at any point. Eventually, it got to a point where I just tried to stay away as much as possible. I think that's when he started to torment my kids instead. And that was sort of the last straw. That's when I knew I needed to leave.
A miracle happened, and his father's girlfriend came to visit me at work. She gave me a credit card and her number and told me to call her when I was ready to leave. They hadn't seen us in years and knew that something was wrong.
What struck me during the following months of my recovery was how difficult I found it to use the R word, because what society had described to me as rape differed from my experience. I walked away without scrapes or bruises, while all the rape victims depicted on television were badly injured or hospitalized. He wasn't the person I was taught to fear. As a young girl, you're taught to stay away from the strange people in town or the bad parts of your community. The person who assaulted me wasn't the stranger hiding in the bushes, but was someone with whom I had shared laughter, someone whose family I knew, whose church I had attended, and someone I trusted.
Looking back, I didn't really think I was being mentally abused. What I was experiencing at home was breaking down my self-esteem, unknowingly, over time. Normally, I would consider myself to be a strong person, and to have someone have that kind of control over me was something that didn't normally happen. After the relationship ended, I really had to learn who I was again. It took a solid couple of years before I finally felt like myself, that I had an opinion, that I mattered, and it's not all in my head, that my feelings mattered. I built it all back up over time.
The following months were the hardest of my life. The incident resulted in me uprooting everything, transferring schools, and moving to another town. I felt isolated as my friends were forced to choose sides, to believe me or defend him. Even years later, I am haunted by the fact that he doesn't realize what he's done. He is my rapist, and I will never shed the parts of my story that he has shaped.
I ended up working with survivors of sexual assault, stalking, rape, the whole gamut of things. And the biggest thing I saw in that, and also saw reflected in my own recovery, was the need to feel believed and to control your own recovery and your own digesting of the experience. For me, one thing that was really helpful moving forward was having friends that I could talk to, that I felt believed me unconditionally. It also helped me play the story back in my mind in a way that made me feel like I wasn't going insane.
The story continues with even more abuse and even bigger holes in the drywall. But I fixed them. He kept drinking. Things got better gradually, if only a little at a time. He found medications that worked for him, and he changed. I'm still with him. We've been married for 6 years. I still struggle with the trauma and the regret. I don't know if I will ever stop questioning our relationship. I feel doubt, anxiety, and guilt every day. I'm in counseling to work through the struggle, and for the first time in a while, I have hope for my future. I am starting to understand that I don't need him.
After suffering abuse, I went through a slew of really poor dating choices, substance abuse, and got myself into more challenging situations that just caused more damage to myself.
What you should be looking for is someone who listens when you say, no, even though you really want me to do this, I'm not comfortable and that's my boundary, which is another thing we don't teach kids growing up. I think most of us learn it the hard way. I certainly did.
If you're still in an abusive relationship, talk to your friends, definitely.
Don't let anybody isolate you from your friends. Don't ever let your relationship be the only important relationship in your life. You need more support than that, especially when you're young.
Walking away is the hardest thing to do until you do it. And it will be hard in that moment, in the moments following, but the days and the months and the weeks and the years after that, you will find pieces of yourself that you had lost or didn't know that they were there to begin with. And reclaiming that is so important. Walking away from it is not an act of hate towards anyone else, but it's an act of love for yourself. For me, telling my story was my way of not remaining silent, of reclaiming what happened to me and going forward with that. Another reason is because I've seen men in my life that don't know that they're abusers, and my abuser certainly did not know that he was one. And so just as much, I think that we've failed women in giving them the tools to come forward and own their stories. I think we've also failed men in the descriptions that we set for abuse, because for some of them it's really difficult to identify their behaviors as abuse.
You have control over your own life. You have the ability to create any reality, and you do have that power.
You're allowed to not be okay. You're allowed to not be perfect. Take time to yourself. You're allowed to cry, and you're allowed to be angry, and you're allowed to be all these things, and not punishing yourself for feeling them. You're gonna be okay. Make the first step.